Good morning and good afternoon to all of you. I will now explain to you the EU policy in terms of energy and climate change. So the European Union has different climate policy challenges. It is based on the Paris Agreement from 2015, which wants to limit man-made global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius. So that's roughly 35 degrees Fahrenheit. And ideally, even at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So the EU has committed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2050 from 90s levels, so pre-industrial levels, to 80 to 95%. So energy efficiency is one of the pillars, but it will not be sufficient to achieve this target. Substantial changes are required in energy use in all sectors, so power generation, transport, industry, and residential use. So that's heating and cooling. This means that we need to reduce consumption and as well to change how we produce energy. Renewable electricity is to play a major role, but full electrification is not realistic. So the European climate goals have different targets. One of the key targets for 2030 is to cut at least 40% of greenhouse gas emissions compared to the 90s level. Now, that was the original target, but now the political consensus is more towards 50-55%, and there are even some proposals to go for 65%. Another key target for 2030 is to have at least 32.5% improvement in energy efficiency. And finally, at least 32% share in renewable energy. Now, for 2050, the long-term strategy is to be climate neutral. How will the EU achieve this challenge? So there are two milestones. The first one is what we call clean energy for all Europeans, and the second one is the European Green Deal. First, clean energy for all Europeans. So that's a very voluminous package which was presented by the European Commission in November 16. It contains 8 legislative proposals, and the overall objective is to facilitate the access to renewables, to a cleaner, more affordable energy transition. Now, this came after a long period of tough negotiations, because in the EU, to make legislation, first the European Commission makes a proposal, and it needs to be approved by both the European Parliament, which is the elected body of the European Union, and by each member state. So that's a long and complex process. Now, if we're looking a bit at the different pieces of legislation from this Clean Energy for All Europeans package, let's go first with the Energy Efficiency Directive, which we call the EED. It is a non-binding target of 32.5% by 2030. This directive is up for revision by at least, at the latest, 2023. Member states have to achieve annual energy savings of 0.8% between 2021 and 30 on the energy sales to final consumers. Energy poverty is now considered with this legislation as a very important aspect of all energy policies. A very important point for the heating industry has been the PEF. So the PEF is the primary energy factor. It is a metric to compare the primary energy consumption of products using different energy sources. So the energy sources are very different from one member state to another. For example, in France, nuclear power is one of the main energy sources for electricity. That would not be the case in Germany. So it is as well a political decision when you set the path. It can favor one specific energy source. Now, the PEF used to be 2.5 for electricity, and with this directive, it moved to 2.1. This is not good news for the industry because a reduced PEF value is likely to encourage a switch from oil or gas boilers to electricity-driven heating. So, for example, heat pumps. On our side, Eurofuel, we have long argued that energy poverty is best addressed through social policy measures. As well, the PEF is very important because it's embedded in other pieces of legislation, such as the eco-design and the energy labeling measures. The second important piece of legislation is the Renewable Energy Directive, which we call RED II, because it was a recast. Here we have a binding target of 32% of renewable energy by 2030. In particular, second-generation biofuels and biogas have to be at least 3.5% in transport by 2030. There's an indicative target for heating and cooling. What's very important for us here is the definition of renewable liquid and gaseous transport fuels of non-biological origin. This definition de facto excludes the use of similar renewable liquid fuels for non-transportation purposes. This impairs the development of innovative liquid fuels, which would have the potential to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in the heating sector as well. In our view, it should be made clear that low-carbon fuels are not exclusively reserved to transportation, but that it can help decarbonize heating oil in boilers. The third important piece of legislation is the Energy Efficiency of Buildings Directive. It aims at improving the potential for energy efficiency in the building sector, which is the larger single economic consumer in Europe. The text includes measures designed to accelerate the rate of building renovation towards more efficient systems. It has a considerable impact on the heating oil sector as it promotes member states to incentivize the replacement of fossil fuel boilers with other more sustainable alternatives. National governments are also required to include in the renovation strategies concrete plans to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions and to facilitate the transformation of existing buildings into nearly zero energy buildings. Here again, the calculation of the PEF is very important. The good news is that energy poverty has to be considered in the renovation strategies. So, to summarize this package of measures, the impact it has on heating oil. Well, on the plus side, the principle of energy efficiency first is enshrined in the legislation. The principle of technology neutrality is also central. On the more negative side, the reduced PEF value is not so good for the heating oil industry, and as well the narrow definition of biofuels and how they can be incentivized is too narrow. The second milestone for EU is the European Green Deal. So that's much more recent. The objective here is to increase the EU climate ambition for 2030 and 2050. And as well, what's new is that it aims at being as much a growth strategy as an environmental one. The European Green Deal was launched in 2019. It has been a bit slowed down with the COVID-19 pandemic, but it is still underway. Some priorities have been shifted, but things are rolling. So now I need to insist on the fact that most of the legislation here has not yet been adopted. We have some strategies, a lot of discussions, but we have a lot of work on this package in 2021 and as well maybe 22. The first important strategy in this European Green Deal is the energy system integration strategy that was presented in July of this year. It strongly pushes for the electrification of heating by promoting the rollout of renewable sources, for example, heat pumps, and limiting the use of fossil-based solutions. The Commission also mentions that currently there is a lack of internalization of CO2 costs in heating fuels and calls for a revision of the Energy Taxation Directive. There's also a review of the primary energy factor in view, and they want as well to have a more comprehensive terminology for all renewable and low carbon fuels and a European system of certification. So while this strategy per se will not have a direct impact on the heating oil sector, the measures it proposes will affect us. On one side, the revision of the directives on energy efficiency and renewable energy are likely to introduce higher decarbonization targets, favoring the rollout of renewable sources for heating. On the other side, new rules will be introduced on the taxation of energy products. The next big milestone we have is the renovation wave. So we are expecting this strategy in September. At this stage, it is very difficult to assess the impact that it will have on the sector because it will depend as well on the amount of funds available and the criteria attached to the incentives that member states will introduce at national level. However, there is a political agreement that the post-coronavirus recovery should promote green investments, and housing renovation should be one of them because it creates jobs. So this approach is also reflected in the European Commission proposal for a recovery plan. And the green oath, do not harm, is a very important part of it. Here, the risk for the heating oil industry is real because it's an ambitious renovation wave. Currently, roughly 75% of the building stock is energy inefficient. So there is really room for improvement. But reducing buildings' carbon footprint is likely to be one of the objectives and have an impact on heating oil. So the options are currently being under evaluation by the European Commission, and there is a public consultation on the renovation wave. It is asking stakeholders their views on different measures, and one of them is the possibility to ban fossil fuel heating systems by a certain date. With the European Green Deal, we will also have several reviews of existing legislation. The first one is the Energy Efficiency Directive. The objective is to overcome the remaining regulatory and non-regulatory barriers and market failures, which do not allow energy efficiency to be fully part of the energy system. We have here a risk of more stringent measures, but as well the opportunity to highlight bioliquids and their roles for heating. Another review is the one of the Renewable Energy Directive. Here, the objective is to ensure it is fit for purpose, and we have the same risk of more stringent measures, but again, the opportunity to highlight bioliquids. The review of the Energy Taxation Directive will be a very important one. Currently, according to the different assessments, this directive fails to link the environmental performance of fuels and their energy content with the minimum taxation levels set by the legislation. This review is pivotal to the European Green Deal for the development of energy storage, but also to foster low-carbon energy technologies in general. The consensus right now is to go towards a CO2-based taxation. There's as well a potential extension of the scope to cover other fuel types. So we might have minimum taxation levels applied for innovative fuels, such as e-fuels, but we could also have incentives, so exemptions or very low taxation levels, which might favor the promotion of innovative fuels and therefore help build a business case. Now, the expected impact of the European Green Deal has yet to be seen because, as I said, we are still working on this package. On the plus side, we do have an opportunity to build a business case for low carbon liquid fuels. We do have an opportunity to push for innovation. On the more negative side, well, the crisis has hit very much the initial plans. So the budget, which was supposed to be allocated for innovation, has shrinked a lot. We do have threats of a gradual phase out of heating oil. Now, even if this doesn't turn out as hard legislation, it raises a problem of image for liquid heating fuels. And that's something we've been working on very much. So to summarize all of this, I would say it's a crucial time for heating oil. We have different threats, stringent boiler standards, fuel quality requirements, potentially bans, CO2 emissions limits and taxation, and a political push for renewables. As well, we have opportunities with hybrid systems and future liquid fuels. And to conclude, I would say that it is right now that the industry needs to cooperate to ensure that there's a future for liquid fuels for heating, which can contribute to the energy transition.